I'm not really to videotape this, which is good because I'm not really an artist anyway, so you won't be missing much. This is a sketch I did of Dreads about a month ago, I guess, and actually the original is over there, and I didn't even scan this one. I just took a picture of it with my phone and then uploaded it to the computer and then printed it. I've got one of the Xerox color laser printers sitting over there, a couple $100 I think. Nothing fancy, just kind of cool. Don't need color for this anyway. This is just a reference picture I found for a while there. I kept Googling, how to sketch female forms and also some female robots and female action figures and whatnot. Dreads is not going to be like your typical sci-fi hot chick robot. I'm not sure if she's even going to be this good looking when we're done, but the backstory for Dreads and for Mars Clipper in that respect, Dreads wasn't expected to fly for another few years, and through a chain of events that I'm not going to explain right now, the opportunity came to fly her much sooner. In fact, nobody thought it would be ready to go. They were just kind of working towards a future date. So there's a lot of things on Dreads that really aren't prime time ready to fly. So things like the software, the basic AI interface, the hardware, its ability to speak and be understood, it's all kind of pre-production kind of stuff. So now I just kind of wanted to get some shots of the beginnings, so to speak. Printed off a bunch of each of these, so I'm just going to start with that. I've been teasing on Facebook for a while that something was happening, but and then every time I would, do that, it's like the thinking is, yeah, you post and tell everybody you're doing something, then something else happens and you get busy, and then nothing happens for months. And by the time something does happen, people forgot you said anything. So grab a few pencils here. This one is probably pretty straight, so I see that there was guidelines because this was a part of a tutorial how to sketch, so which is good because that's what I needed. Eventually, I'm kind of torn on how this is going to work, honestly. This is kind of close to what I think the final Dreads robot is going to look like. Except I got the proportions quite wrong. The head is too big for human, but it doesn't have to be human scale. All right. Now I'm actually not quite scaled on the drawing anyway. This one printed a little bit too small. But what I'm going to do is kind of get a figure for proportions on this one. I think her legs are too long for what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay closer to the shorter legs, but I'm going to give it a little bit more longer legs. Probably smaller head. And then the one thing to notice is, this one, arms are about let's say crotch level. And here your fingertips, if you're standing up, your fingertips go way down your thighs. So your arms are a lot longer than you think they are. I don't have a lot of drawing experience, so I'm kind of learning this as I go. I'm not going to say making it up as I go, but learning as I go. In fact, a couple of years ago, I think it was for this project even. No, Little Red Welder. I was going to draw it first, and I ended up doing it mostly in Lightwave instead. But I bought this clipboard, artists, I don't know what they even call it, sketchboard, I guess. Yeah, sketchboard. And I walked into an art supply store with a picture of what it was in my mind, and I didn't really even know if it existed or not. I don't remember if I'd ever seen one. I must have, because I knew they existed. But thankfully, it was within sight of the door, or else I would have been really confused about how to buy the dang things. I didn't know where to find it. So, first thing I want to do is make a reference line here. Not that it really matters which way this goes. This will be fine. So I'm going to make a line, kind of a center line for the new dreads. And what I'm going to do, using this for a reference and then looking at this, I'm going to transfer these lines and then make the adjustments that I want to make. Guidelines. And this is a copy of a copy, so I don't really care if I mess it up a little bit. I'm going to make the head bigger than hers. Just for reference, how big is hers? Say it's 1 1/4 inches. This one is 1 3/4 inches. Let's go 1.5 inches and just see what that looks like. Also, let's keep the proportion, the size the same, and we'll just change the proportions for now. Eventually, I might actually do some of this with transparency. Let's just put her there. And it's not going to look anything like her, I'm just using her as a reference. Dreads, the robot doesn't necessarily have to be all muscular. In fact, she's probably not going to have exactly human proportions. But at the same time, I think it would be useful for the mission if the robot had enough human, what would be the word? Characteristics, I guess, so that you could kind of relate to it. I'm kind of just going to pick some of the lines that I like. One thing I'm reminding myself of when I'm doing this is going to be a really mechanical robot. Probably going to end up sort of in the RoboCop Terminator style, I think. Somewhere, well, I had an idea on this a while ago. I think what's going to happen, it's going to have aspects of RoboCop and Terminator. And a little bit of like Stormtroopers. And a little bit of this is kind of cart before the horse, I guess. I've been working on writing this for 2 or 3 years off and on. And in my mind I've had an idea what Dreads was going to be like. And then I decided I really needed to get serious about making Dreads. Not too long ago I came up with the idea of going forward with starting the art side of this. Now I'm not sure if it's going to be, it's not going to be animated anytime soon, but that's a possibility in the future. I'm thinking it'll probably be more of a cartoon series in the beginning because I want to get the story coming out. And what really kind of pushed me over the edge, Freefall is a web-based cartoon that I've been reading for, man, like 10 years or something like that. I'm trying to think when I first saw it. I'm pretty sure I was about the time I started the predecessor to this story is when I found Freefall, which is kind of fun. So that's kind of been a tie-in for a long time. Anyway, what it kind of came out was my idea for the story. I don't really want it to sit there for, waiting for me to completely finish it before I get it out. I kind of like the idea of releasing it a little bit at a time. Now, I'll be the first to admit I am aware of Andy Weir and The Martian, and that was kind of his way of getting The Martian out there, was he released it one chapter at a time on his website, got lots of fan feedback, and then from there, it kind of took off on its own. Well, I started writing the predecessor to this several years before I was aware of The Martian. So, just saying. But as much as I want to release the story, I kind of like the idea of doing it as a web-based cartoon. And it's, I've never done anything like that before. So this will be kind of an odd experience all around. Okay, I'll just sketch her as it is first, and then I can change it. That will help me get the proportions right. And in this, she's got one arm up, so I'm just going to flip it and do both arms. Ironically, I did hers one arm up too, but I'm not going to do that today. Well, I was hoping I wasn't going to get any more rain today because I may be stuck here tomorrow. I can't get out. Just go trace it off the window. And then we'll be back. Come back when we get that. Now that we got kind of the reference started, this gives me a kind of a good outline of what I want her, like her silhouette to be. Yeah, so I mentioned before, it's going to have elements of somewhere between Stormtroopers and RoboCop and the Terminator, as far as, looking like your classic sci-fi robot. Okay. I just remember there's a hole in the paper there, so we can't have that. And I'll probably go back and forth between this and Lightwave, most likely. Lightwave is a 3D animation program. It's maybe not the best thing for this, it's just something I'm more familiar with. So I started looking at Lightwave earlier today, and I realized that was maybe not a good place to start because I don't have enough of the design figured out yet. So I kind of like how the body came out on this one, so I'm going to transfer this to here now. And thinking about it, parts of what made the Terminator work was the fact that you could see some of the structure. There was little actuators everywhere that made you think it could actually work, even though it was essentially just a puppet. They never actually made it operate, especially the first Terminator. One of the things that makes her lines the way she is she's very muscular. Well, the robot isn't going to have muscles. She may have little bumps and bulges, but that's because of the motors and the actuators. So we can kind of clean up her lines a little bit. not going to have massive cleavage or anything like that. Give her a little bit of a curve. Every sci-fi, well, not every sci-fi. The irony is Star Wars didn't, you know, but it seems like you should have some kind of a girl robot. I think a girl robot would help. Couldn't hurt, right? So the arm. I like that line. I'm trying to figure out the ratio here. It doesn't necessarily have to be her. I don't have a picture handy, but the lines of RoboCop worked really well too, because he had, you know, his armor looked like giant pectoral muscles, even though it was just a robot armor. You definitely saw the influence there. So it doesn't have to be a complete girl, but I've always referred to her as, you know, a female. I don't want it to be just a robot. I want it to be something that you end up talking to it at the end of the day, kind of thing. Not like romantically, but just to have somebody to talk to. Because deep space mission with no contact with humans, not a good idea. You gotta have somebody to talk to. While I have said this is not the Martian, Mars does play in the storyline. It's just different. Somewhere more like space trucking. Mystery Science Theater comes to mind also, where, and I honestly didn't see enough of Mystery Science Theater to talk much about it, but my remembering of it was the guy was on the spaceship by himself, and he built his own robots just for somebody to talk to. Something like that. I'm going to draw this arm instead. I like that better. I want to see the separation between the body. Because elbow should be close to waist. And it's too long if it's going to end here. An idea I've also considered is the robot may not have traditional shoulder, elbow, wrist layout. There's no reason that we have to be completely humanoid. But since it is a robot, we could decide mid-mission to just upgrade the arms. It's like, hey, would you like new hands? Sure, why not? Yeah, that'll work. For now, I'll draw human hands. They're less threatening, or I will attempt to. placeholder for hands. When I drew this, I was thinking the bottom of the rib cage, so I think if we, or she's got 6-packs, we don't need that. These are like expansion joints. I think I like that idea better. I'm the kind of person that when I'm drawing something like this, because of my background as a mechanic and I worked on things like airplanes and helicopters, if I draw a line, I want to know why it's there, and I want to be able to actually make this in the future. So there's a really strong likelihood that I'm going to be creating some kind of a physical form of this. Maybe not a full-on robot, but in RoboCop, there was these detail lines that were kind of like gussets, like structural. So the story is, the mission that we're doing the story about was kind of a kludge at the last minute. Well, how fast could you put together a space mission? This is set basically real time now. We don't have warp drive, we don't have faster than light communications. A lot of the things that a lot of us consider as science fiction are a lot more readily available than you might think. We've got, take a look at something here. We've got Honda has Asimo, and I'm not even sure if that's how you say it. They've had Asimo for at least 10 years. Where he's a humanoid robot. Now, I'm never really clear how much is happening behind the scenes, if somebody's actually puppeting him, or if he's actually at a point where they can say, okay, Asimo, walk down to the cafeteria and bring us back four teas and some crackers. All right, because in the videos, he's walking down the hallway, and he'll have a tray of drinks, and he'll bring it to somebody, and he's able to listen to. One of the things that they showed is he can hear 3 people talking at the same time and actually pick up on what they're all saying, so that if they're all asking him for something, he'll get it most of the time. It's not just one at a time, which is a pretty good trick. He's able to walk, he's able to hop on one foot, he's able to kind of jog, but not very fast. All right. His ability to hold things with his hands and to pick it up and put it down on the table and that kind of thing is pretty good. But, he's probably still got the abilities of a 4-year-old, a child. So, with that in mind, it's conceivable that a robot could be made using systems that are pretty much available now, right? And it's fairly easy to get a robot to walk. Wheels are easier, though. This is actually something I had thought about. Is it worth trying to make a robot walk? Because this robot is never going to leave the spaceship. It's always going to be in a very controlled environment. This actually started before I lived in the school bus, but one of the main parts of the spaceship is approximately the size of the school bus. It actually just worked out that way. But it does give me a really good feel for it. You know, it's about the same size. So you're like, okay, robot doesn't ever walk more than about 30 feet at a time. All right, on a smooth floor. There's no steps on the spaceship. Do we need feet? Would wheels make more sense? So one of the things that I came up with, we'll keep the legs, we'll keep the feet and the knees and the joints. However, we could integrate wheels into the feet and make it sort of like between the hoverboard, you know, where you step on the thing with the wheels and you could kind of scoot around and it would take off and you know, or the Segway scooter from 10 years ago that you'd stand on it and then it was self-balancing with two wheels. I feel that that's really annoying in a way, that the aspect of constantly moving back and forth to balance. So what I think I would do is have wheels in the feet, maybe in the heels, and then when you get to where you're going, the wheel would retract a little bit, and then you could just stand there, right? And then when it's time to go, sure, get the wheels moving again, but then you wouldn't be moving constantly. So, yes, I'm drawing this as a cartoon, but I also want it to be something that could feasibly be put together without, you know, a lot of trauma. I don't want to dedicate the rest of my life to making some of these things work. I just want them to be something that could work. And that's why I think when we first saw the Terminator, it was so amazing. I mean, the Terminator came out 83, 84, a long time ago. But it was so well done for its time. Every time you saw the robot moving its hand, you believed that it was real. You know, looking at the DVD now, you could probably pick it apart a little bit, but there was enough believability to it that you totally suspended your disbelief and you're like, it was real. There was no doubt that it was walking around. You know, even though it was essentially a very well-made puppet. And that's really the magic of filmmaking, is that you see something and you know it's not real, but you believe it anyway, right? So my goal, even if I stay with a simple line drawing, I want to have enough of the detail in place that you would look at it, you're like, yeah, you could see somebody making something like this and it could work. And because this was essentially a last minute idea, and because we have things like 3D printers and CNC machining available, we could totally upgrade her on the flight. You know, so you're on your spaceship, you're blasting across the universe. Between you and your mission control friends back home, you could say, you know, she's doing pretty good, except this part doesn't work very well. Can we maybe change it? So from episode to episode, she may get abilities she didn't have in the beginning, things that they were working on but they didn't have finished in time, but we could then upgrade it later. And the neat thing about robots is it's 99% software. You know, you think about, well, even R2-D2, a tin can, but his personality came through in the beeps and squeaks, right? And the more I thought about that, because I'm kind of working towards essentially a design Bible, where I want to have different elements figured out that will always be there, sort of constants, even though we can upgrade it. You know, what's the basic shape going to be? In my mind, this is based on a person I know who's about 5 feet tall. It just, you know, I'm like, okay. And it literally came about where I was thinking about this way in the very beginning. I hadn't hardly really started writing it, but I'm like, I needed a robot to go along on the mission. And spaceflight is very expensive. It costs you an insane amount of money to get a pound of anything off of Earth into space. once it's in space, it's not too bad. You're just coasting along, but it's very expensive to get heavy things and big things. So I thought, well, it would be a clever shortcut if your robot just wasn't very big. I mean, think about like Buck Rogers, the TV show. Twinkie was, little Munchkin. All your R2-D2 droids were, little short tin cans driving around. So it was just kind of like, well, okay. If the robot wasn't very tall, that would, that literally that was about as far as I got. I was like, oh, okay, I'll model it after a shorter person. So, when I'm looking at this, yeah, her legs are way longer than I want them to be. So I'm kind of playing with the proportions a little bit. I may go back closer to this, depending how this turns out. There's no reason that you need to have really long legs on your robot, right? But this does seem like the legs are too short and the body's too long, so I think we'll kind of compromise. That's kind of why I was drawing my guidelines and get it to sort of look humanoid. Another part of this, if the stars all aligned and somehow, magically this thing ever made it to live production, which would be just every geek's dream, it would be nice if the robot could be made as a suit that a live actor or actress could wear. So if we kind of keep the proportions humanoid enough, then we could say that we could build this as a suit that somebody could wear, right? The other idea, and these are just things that I ponder sometimes when I should be working or sleeping or doing other important things. But this would be a fun project to take into schools as part of a STEM program, which STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And a lot of people say it as STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. I think art is very important. And the schools are so busy trying to teach people how to do new math and to pass the stupid standardized tests that nobody's really learning anything useful. I mean, in my job, I see people come through and, they can't do basic things anymore. Kids that are in school and, you look at them, it's like, how do you manage to tie your shoes in the morning? And then you look at them and you realize, no, they've got Velcro. They don't tie their shoes anymore. So that makes me a little bit afraid. I've never worried recently about anybody in the next generation taking my job away. But it would be nice if at the end of my career I didn't, if I leave, it would be nice if somebody would at least take over. I'm going to say these are expansion joints. Some of the Mars spacesuits that you see, what they're doing is the problem with the current, and this is back even from Apollo, the moon missions. The spacesuit is very difficult to live in because you need atmosphere at pressure to survive. Your body can't operate in a vacuum, you'll die. So the simplest thing is to make a suit and then fill it full of air pressure so that your body has the pressure. Well, they say that the suits that they use on the International Space Station are inflated to about 10 psi. Our atmosphere on Earth is 14, so 10 is a little bit less, but it's usable. Most people can function at 10. Well, 10 psi happens to be the pressure of a volleyball. So imagine if you were inside a volleyball and you're trying to move against this thing constantly inflated. It's very difficult to work. And that's one of the things that most astronauts will talk about if they ever did a space mission is they're fighting against the suit all the time, and you're out there for maybe 8 hours, fixing the Hubble telescope or something like that. So you're trying to do very fine work fighting against this pressurized container. So some of the ideas for spacesuits that they're looking at instead of it being a flexible material, make it out of something hard like armor. So say for instance, if you look at the knight in Shining Armor, if you could make a hard suit that then had all of those little flexible pieces that were riveted together, and then put your pressurized container inside of that, maybe that could work. Because then instead of trying to flex a flexible part, you'd be flexing a bearing. That might be easier. So that's where some of the designs are going. So the robot will never, at least not in the first 3 or 4 years of story that I've come up with, she's not made to go down on the surface of Mars. She's always going to be on a spaceship. But some of these elements kind of come up. I like the idea of how the stormtroopers were made. Not in like the storyline, but actually how the characters guys were making the costumes. It's a simple process where you heat up the special kind of plastic, you put it over a mold, you turn on a shop vac, it sucks all the air out, and you come up with this fairly nice plastic piece. It doesn't cost very much. You can literally make it with a pizza oven and a shop vac. It doesn't take very much. I actually was playing with these a couple of years ago. I bought a piece of the plastic and made a few pieces just to see the process. It's remarkably easy to do. So in the storyline for Dreads, that's how her pieces were made, because it's a quick, easy way to make a quick prototype. She's going to have plastic body pieces over a mechanical, probably aluminum chassis. Now, since I've got a background in aircraft, helicopters and jets for the military, I'm thinking, yeah, she's going to have inside of her, servos and arms, and this is coming right back to how the RoboCop and Terminator look like they were made. So you're going to have all these little actuators that come out and push on different places to make, so if you want the arm to move, you just have a thing that pushes back and forth here, and the arm goes in and out. Or you could have a motor here that would flex each joint, like a servo, like your radio-controlled airplanes. Okay? And that's all you really need. And I actually spent a few hours sketching some of these ideas out, and the notepad is somewhere around here. And I realized that if I gave myself permission not to have full range of motion, because it doesn't have to have every range of motion that a human can do. So your shoulder is actually pretty unique in that it can go outward or forward. Plus you can shrug your shoulders. I'm not sure what that's for, but you have that ability. And then your hand can rotate. Well, that's hard to do on a joint. But maybe we don't need to do that. Maybe we could just put a pivot here, and then your arm could pivot, roll it this way, and then the elbow could still flex. And do that. Okay? That's simple enough to do. And you could do the same thing down for the wrist. And then I thought about it. I'm like, well, if the robot is there to kind of help the person who's there might be all kinds of little tricks that we can do with her abilities. One example is if you're turning a screwdriver, you have to stop, pull it out, push it back in, do another half a turn, right? So if you got your screwdriver and you can't just continuously turn. Well, so now we've got motorized screwdrivers that you just hit the button and the end turns. Okay. So in my mind as a mechanic, I'm like, well, I've got power screwdrivers that I have to hold with my hand. Well, if you've got a robot, why would she need to have a hand that can hold the power screwdriver? Why don't we just make the screwdriver that could be docked to her wrist, eliminate the hand, have the screwdriver there. Now she can put screws in. And when she's done putting the screws in, she would lay that on the counter and then grab the next tool and dock it to her arm. Right? Why make a hand that can pick up a tool when you can just eliminate the hand and make the tool part of the arm? Genius! So that's kind of where we're going. That's one of the things I've been looking at. These are the things that keep me awake late at night. Okay, so that's kind of what the body's sort of going to look like, I think. Once I get this kind of hammered out, then I'll go back on the computer and use this for a background layer and then turn this into a 3D object. That'll be for another time, but I kind of just, I liked the basics of this, but then the proportions weren't very good. So I needed to go back to a reference, and I picked this one at random. It's not going to look like her. It's going to be more like this. But I think we're on the right track. Doesn't have to be exactly human. In fact, this is a thought that I have every now and then. It's like you get the battle of the sexes or the battle of the races, and you're like, I want to have equal rights with that person. I'm like, why would you limit yourself? Why not do something better than that person? Right? So once I got that idea, I was like, well, is there any reason that this robot has to have the limitations of a human? None that I could think of. So that gives us all kinds of options in. One idea was, if the arms are replaceable, which they should be, or rebuildable, there may be an advantage to having double elbows. Make shorter segments and put two elbows, one here and one here. It would give you better access to something. Or you could make it like a forklift and have a single arm with a gripper on the end. The hand itself was another thing I sketched out a while ago. When I was figuring out the joints, I started looking at the hands. And you got like 3 or 4 ideas that between science fiction and robotics competitions, everybody's got their ideas. And a single gripper is very, very strong, very easy to figure out. It's like vice grips. You can make that work pretty easy. But everybody wants to be able to pick up things. You want to be able to pick up a screwdriver. Well, that's hard to do with a gripper, right? So then you need opposable thumbs and maybe fingers. In cartooning, a lot of times you have 3 fingers instead of 4. It's easier to draw. That's a huge advantage. So maybe you could do 2 fingers and a thumb. All right, that would give you kind of a gripper. Plus, you could wrap it around things. And that's when I came up with the idea of just removing the hand completely. Maybe we have one hand that's really good at a task. Like, for instance, if you got a handful of nuts and you're trying to put them on bolts, would you use a finger? Or would you use a magnet to pull the nut into a socket and then have that as part of your nut driver? Because if you look at like a car manufacturer, they don't have robots that have hands on them. They have industrial robots that are very finely made to one very specific task, and then it can do that same task over and over. So I think if we look at it from that point of view, it would be like, you got, as a mechanic, you got a ratchet, and then on the end of the ratchet you can add an extension, and then on the end of that you could add your socket. Okay? And then sometimes you don't want the ratchet, and sometimes you just take the socket and put it on the end of your screwdriver. Or you take the socket and you put it on the end of your electric or air-powered tool to go faster. Okay. Or some days you're cutting, so you'd have scissors or a grinder. Some days, maybe you really need a hammer, for something. So there's a good chance that a robot like this could have something as simple as a tool belt with all the various accessories. And okay, if you need your electric screwdriver, maybe you just put your hands in your pockets, you pull your arms out, your hands stay in your pocket, and you go down to your tool belt and you grab yourself a screwdriver. It may also be a possibility that are we limited to 2 arms? Because man, a third arm would sure be handy some days. Maybe we figure out some way to, what was it? I'm going to offend all the India people, not Native American Indians, but is it the Hindu god that had multiple arms coming out? Wouldn't that be handy? Why limit yourself to a human? Just a thought. Sometimes at this point in the process, I mentioned the design Bible idea. Define what it is and also define what it's not. For instance, it's not going to have any soft flesh. It's a hard body robot, which probably is almost a technical term. That makes it a lot simpler in some aspects, because like for instance in Lightwave, my animation program, Lightwave can do humans. Like if you flex your arm, it can actually show that the arm is flexing, the muscle is sort of represented. Well, in this case, we don't have to worry about that because it's clearly a mechanical device. It's got, it's made out of metal or plastic. I'll just stop there for that. It's a hand, close enough. I don't think these are symmetrical. It doesn't really matter. What I'll end up doing when I get this thing a little bit more done, take it back on the computer, scan it again, and then I can draw a line down the center and decide which half I like, and then just eliminate the other half, do a mirror image, and then you got a nice set of symmetry. Also, like I was saying before, this is essentially molded out of plastic. And because this is an early prototype, this isn't going to be like the Honda experience where it's all very well engineered and, carefully designed and, guaranteed to last, 100,000 miles or whatever, which actually in space isn't very far. But if it works better or not. This will be more like an aircraft was, where there's screw panels, and you can open her up very easily. One part of the story, at some point we realized that she didn't have very good battery life, and so we experimented with adding battery packs. And so in the beginning we just kind of copied the military idea of making a cargo vest that had pockets in it. Then we just attached batteries to that, and that worked for a while. And then further in, we decided, well, they were working, but every time she moved, the batteries would kind of bounce around. So then we looked at, well, we could take off sections of her bodywork and recreate upgraded bodywork that had more rooms for the batteries. And at the time, I wasn't drawing it, so I just said, okay, we'll just take off parts of you and put on new parts and have parts, room for the batteries. So that's about as far as that got. But So in that respect, it's going to be a little bit rough around the edges, and that's kind of part of the plan. There may be a reason then for why a robot would have breasts in the first place. Maybe that's, there's, you know, the servos that operate the arms could work well in there. That actually kind of makes sense. So instead of it being for breasts, there's actually a physical reason for them to be there. Plus all the nerds will think it's cool. Yeah. Now again, legs are the way they are because of the muscle structure. We don't really have muscle structure to worry about here, so in this aspect, we would make something easy to manufacture. In fact, her actual internal structure, and this is the thing, you know, when you're building something, your internal structure is just going to be a simple linkage, and then you're going to lay body work over it. You know, think about like your fenders on your car, kind of a thing. Fenders there, or, you know, the dashboard in your car is just, you know, something to hold the gauges up. It doesn't, the dash doesn't serve any purpose otherwise. These were kind of fun, and I didn't do this on purpose, but this character is wearing sort of a combat boot or a motocross boot, which, since I ride motorcycles, looks kind of cool. When I drew her, in the notes that are up on the wall, I said, you know, right about here it says, looks like MX boots, motocross boots. And in my mind I had the backstory already figured out of why that was. The guy that designed these was probably sort of like me, that he liked that look of, you know, combat boots or motocross boots. And then he went off to Burning Man and then never came back. You know, so there's parts of this that were made by different people that either stayed with the team or left and went and did something else. And so maybe all the parts don't quite match. Also, parts of the robot might be off the shelf. Okay. One idea that I had, of course I can never see it when I need it, but I drew these the eyes as somewhat square with round corners, right? GoPro, most people know what the GoPro camera looks like, but GoPro also makes a smaller version called, I think it's called the Session, which I have one around here somewhere, and it's just a little cube of a camera. And I realized that the scale of the GoPro Session camera was really close to what I wanted the scale of the head to be. That might be why I did the head too big also. So I was thinking about it, and I'm like, if you're in a hurry and maybe you don't have unlimited resources, it would be a clever shortcut if you could find a camera that worked good enough that you could just go down to Best Buy and buy 20 of them, put them in stock on your spaceship, and build your robot to use them. Okay. So why reinvent something if you could just take something that works and bolt it on? So that's kind of what I came up with. Is like, so these are, you know, probably GoPro cameras, and they had some really cool detail on them. Like, you got the glass in the front, and then around the edge you see these little tiny screws that hold everything together. I'm like, that's perfect. You know, so why not just build the robot so that she's got GoPro cameras as eyes? Okay, that's easy enough. And then just on a whim, I drew this line across. And in future versions, I've expanded on that, and this becomes kind of like a visor that is actually over the cameras, like a protective piece. Because this is sort of, you know, don't think industrial robot like the industrial robots you see in a car manufacturing place, but it's like an industrial robot that's able to pick up tools and help build things. All right, So it would be kind of a nice idea if she had safety glasses built in to protect her cameras, even though the cameras are removable. Why not just set her up with a flip down shield that would basically, maybe it wouldn't even flip down, maybe it would just always be there. And if she gets it really tore up, then we just get her a new shield and snap it on. So, she's got safety glasses, permanently installed. And, just to make it cool, maybe we'd, give her a little bit of shading on them so they'd be, slightly dark. So maybe you wouldn't always see her cameras, but they'd be there. I drew these antennas to look like Wi-Fi antennas. Like if you got a router and it's got that little antenna, that's what these are going to be. They're just going to stick on there. And same thing. She's going to have Wi-Fi. Now the ship isn't very big. You don't really need antennas, but it's a robot. You got to have antennas. So why not just get Wi-Fi antennas and stick them on there? And then because of the cartoon aspect of it, and she may not have a lot of facial expressions. So we're going to add things in that give her sort of like an expression. So maybe her antennas can do different things. They perk up when she's listening. She's not going to have ears that perk up because she don't have microphones that she can hear you. But if her antennas can move a little bit, if she's in a good mood or a bad mood, maybe we'll put little lights on top of the antennas so that they can change colors, because it's real easy to get multicolor LEDs that can fade from blue to red. That kind of thing is easy. The mouth, I haven't decided if we're going to make it actually animated. One possibility, though, is I was looking some of the electronics websites that I buy way too much stuff from. There's little color displays that are 2 or 3 inches. It's smaller than your phone. And it would be a simple enough thing to just make this a little square LCD screen. And then whenever she's talking, you could actually have video of lips moving, or, a cartoon kind of effect. Okay, that's easy enough. So it's a little bit of a personal assistant, but the biggest reason for Dreads is there because when you're in space, the radio lag time is what they call it, such that if you're on Mars and you're talking to Earth, it takes over 10 minutes, depending on where exactly you are in the alignment. It can take 10 minutes from when you say something on your radio, going across space, 10 minutes later your voice gets to mission control. And then they have to think of an answer, and even if they hear what you say and send you a response back immediately, it takes 20 minutes from when you said it, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back to get the answer. If your spaceship is on fire or you just lost life support, 10 minutes or 20 minutes is unacceptable when all you want to know is, how do I make this thing stop burning? Or what's this red button actually do? Or can I turn this off, or is that going to take out life support? Okay, so what we needed was a faster way to get an answer. Everything that the technical people had access to when they built the spaceship could be entered into a database that you could then look at. It would be like a wiki, like Wikipedia. So you could look up, okay, tell me how life support works. So you're adding oxygen, you're taking out carbon dioxide, you're regulating air pressure, air temperature. Your body works better if there's different mixes of gas, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, but we don't necessarily need all of that. All right, so if we can fine tune it, maybe you work better. We could use plants to help supplement the oxygen. Plants like carbon dioxide. You breathe out carbon dioxide, instead of scrubbing it, give it to the plants. You could have a little garden growing somewhere in the spaceship. The garden would be releasing oxygen. the garden works best if it's got light. It turns out, according to NASA's research, you don't need all of the spectrum of light to get the plants to grow. You could have a very specific color of LED light that the plants would do well on, and it would use 1/10 of the amount of power. Okay, these are all the things that the robot could tell you about. So instead of you constantly waiting 20 minutes for an answer from Mission Control, it'll be just like your telephone, your telephone, that sounds so wrong, your smartphone. You'd say, okay, Google. Okay, I did it quiet enough. Half the time when I say that, my phone wakes up and tries to answer a question, but I'm off grid, and so the phone gets really freaked out because it doesn't know what's going on. So you could say, okay, tell me about this. Or you'd be like, I'm looking at a control box, I'm not sure what it does, and so you could read off the serial number. The robot would be like, oh, that's part of life support, this is what it does. We've got 4 spares in stock, do you need one? And you'd be like, no, it seems like it's working okay. What's this next thing do? Because you're troubleshooting and you're trying to figure out what's going on. The whole premise of this mission is it was a last minute thing. They originally were going to do something else. That mission, something happened. So we took the opportunity because Earth and Mars only line up certain times. So every 2 years or every 4 years, depending on how you look at it, and I always forget the exact details, 24 months, 28 months, okay? So if you don't go now, you have to wait another 28 months, all right? So let's say we had already started the ball rolling and then the mission changed. So what we're actually, the story that I'm doing is what we did on the spur of the moment because the other mission didn't work out. Rather than skipping it, let's go ahead and do something. All right. So things like Dreads. Dreads wasn't really ready yet, but let's take her along and see how she does. All right. But Dreads' main reason, she's the AI, the artificial intelligence. She helps fill the gap created because the people that were supposed to go, their mission got canceled, so there's no reason to send guys that were highly trained on the wrong mission. So we scramble, we recruit a new guy, send him out instead. All of the information that was available is in Dreads. Dreads can answer most questions. And if it's a pressing situation, she can give you the basic information. At the same time, that request is sent back to Mission Control. Mission Control can send you an expanded answer after the fact. So you're like, okay, well, I told you this was the case, and it is, but there's more information that the lead engineer would like to add to it. And that information would constantly be upgrading Dreads' information, such that if we lost communication with Earth, Dreads could get you basically enough information to keep you going. And the guy that is on the mission, one guy and one robot, the guy that's on the mission, since I'm writing it, it's got a lot of my background, and so my resume looks like a joke sometimes because I've done so many different things, and I never really stayed with anything very long. But I picked up a lot of little things in the meantime. So I was a computer technician. I know about working on computers and systems and all that kind of stuff. I was an aircraft mechanic for 10 years, 9 years in the Navy. Any of the stuff that I do on the bus out here is going to make it into the story. Solar systems, battery systems, inverter power, plumbing. When I start building the greenhouse, that all comes together into this. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm doing out here, but I'm always thinking about this story at the same time. I've been working on this for years. It's just not really something I've talked a lot about yet. So that's kind of the storyline, without telling you anything, basically. For anybody who knows, the basic, the different sci-fis, we got a little bit of C-3PO in here, as far as the ability to to talk and to answer questions. I thought a lot about Rami from Andromeda, which was another Gene Roddenberry storyline. Gene Roddenberry is the guy that did Star Trek. So Rami was the artificial intelligence that you talked to when you had a question for the ship. Rami would answer the question. Rami was short for Andromeda. Dreads is short for Dreadnought. Dreadnought was a ship that was a clipper ship back in the spice trade days. So there's some kind of almost historical there. It wasn't just something I made up. It was just like I actually was 3/4 of the script, the storyline that I've written, which is epically long. It's never all going to see the light of day probably. I've always just called her AI. I've never had a name for her. And then at some point in my mind, I'm like, well, that's stupid. You got to have a name for it. And all of a sudden, Dreads just popped up. And I'm like, okay, she's Dreads. You know, that's the name of the AI because that's short for Dreadnought, the name of the ship. She is the robot. You know, it gets a little bit confusing even for me, and I've been doing this for a while. The AI is kind of like the cloud computer on the ship. The AI is running everything. So Dreads herself is actually just a representation of the AI. The AI itself is living in the AI core, which is the big computer system somewhere in the ship. She is just the robot that is saying whatever the core tells her to say. So she isn't all powerful. She's basically just a robot that is your interface to the ship's core, kind of a thing, for whatever that's worth. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of the basics of it. So anyway, this wasn't meant to be a 3-hour clip, but I just wanted to get something on video of putting this together. So this is a great evening project, and I'm using very little power, which is wonderful. The laptop uses a lot of power. If I'm sketching, this is not using very much at all. Gotta love that. Cool. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. There's a lot more coming.